Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Ms. Goodell, if you would call the roll.
Mr. Castillo? Here. Ms. Gill? Aye. Mr. Lawrence? Here. Ms. Ward? Here. Mr. Webb?
Here.
And Mr. Reitinger? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you all will join me for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have someone to move for adoption of the agenda. So moved. There's a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Right on into public comment. In accordance with School Board Bylaw 2.30, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written statement may be submitted to the clerk for dissemination to the board members and for the board deposition of requests. Have any? We are with the Welcome Back to School. We're going to push that back and give Mr. Nkuma an opportunity to get here so that we can have everyone here for the photo. And we're going to move to closed session. Do we have any items for close? Go ahead and move the so let's back up.
In closed? Okay. We better go in.
Someone will read us into.
Mr. Chairman, for pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter, personnel under Section 2.2-3711A1, in particular staff appointments, staff reappointments, staff reassignments, staff resignations, staff retirements, staff performance, staff rescinded offer, staff change in position, child care leave, medical leave, EPED assignments, and advisory committee appointments and resignations.
Is there a second? Second. Much. Ms. Goodell?
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence? Yes. Mr. Reitinger? Yes. Ms. Ward? And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
Someone will move us in open. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. Okay. Is someone will certify, please?
Mr. Chair, whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-377B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification that this school board, by the school board, that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the Falls Church City Public School Board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification applies, and 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Ms. Goodell?
Mr. Castillo? Ms. Gill? Mr. Lawrence? Yes. Mr. Reitinger? Yes. Ms. Ward? And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. I'll move. Can I have consent on the consent agenda? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. All right. Move on to business action on first reading. Turn over to Dr. Noonan or.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the board. I am very pleased to invite Tricia Minson to talk about the first reading of policies. She, along with Amy Hall from the central office, have been working diligently to get as many of these first readings and second readings for policy done as quickly as possible. Again, this is all in an effort to align our policies locally with those that have been model policies from the VSBA, and I want to commend both Tricia and Amy for their incredible work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tricia for first reading.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan, and thanks to the school board members who reached out to me with questions about the comments prior to the meeting. Hopefully that allows us to get through these and answer questions you might have. The first policy for first reading, there are 3 policies that are relate to students with disabilities. It was one of the recommendations of Dr. Cox that these policies be reviewed and updated, and it certainly was high on our to-do list. Those are policies IGBA, JDGA, and JGDB. Those last 2 policies relate to the discipline of students with disabilities, and previously we had one policy that addressed that. This breaks it out into the discipline of students with disabilities as one, and then the discipline of students with disabilities for infliction of, it looks like it has been left off the grid that is on board docs, but for infliction of serious bodily injury, is that term is defined by the code, and that's because there's a different method by which students with disabilities may be disciplined if there is a very serious injury. So the first policy that we'll do is policy IGBA. That's the programs for students with disabilities. That would be replacing our policy 6.25. It aligns very closely with what our previous policy had been, and in many ways, I would not recommend any changes to this because it complies with the Virginia Administrative Code, which are the implementing regs for the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. So there had been one question, which was a good one, and was a similar question to the one that Dr. Noonan had when he and I discussed this policy. On line 7, 8, and 9 of this policy, it talks about students who are enrolled in a full-time virtual school program. That's language directly from the Virginia Code that was added in 2014. In the event we did have a full-time virtual school program, which we do not have at this time, if we enrolled any student who was not a Falls Church resident, we would have to provide them with FAPE, a free appropriate public education, ages 2 through 21, which are the requirements of IDEA. So that language does not apply to us at this point, but if and when we have a full-time virtual school program, if we enroll anyone in that program who is not a resident, we still would be committed to providing them with a free appropriate public education. Are there any questions about policy IGBA? The next policy, the special ed one, is JGDA, disciplining students with disabilities. This is not very different from our original policy 9.35, and it does follow the language that's required for the Virginia Administrative Code. Are there any questions about this policy? And then the policy that's similar is JGDB. As I mentioned, this is the same discipline of students with disabilities, but for infliction of serious bodily injury. Questions on that policy? Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. For these policies, we are going to be meeting with principals and assistant principals, making sure that they know that this is the law, this is what we're following, even though the policies likely won't be adopted until second reading in September. We're planning to do that next week just to make sure we're on board when the school year starts, because we have to follow the federal and state regs whether or not it's part of our policies. So we'll be working on that next week, and I don't expect there to be any issues on that front. The next policies up for first reading are policies that relate to the school board. These were policies that were very similar in many ways to our bylaws 2.1, 2.2, and 2.8. Starting first with what had been bylaw 2.1, which talks about the authority and the title of the school board. We're breaking that down into policy BB, school board legal status, and policy BBAA, board member authority. And they're very similar in language with what our previous policy had been. Instead of being one policy, it's now broken out into 2. The first one being policy BB, school board legal status. Are there any questions about this policy?
Questions?
Second one is policy BBAA, board member authority. Any questions about that policy?
See any?
Hearing none. The next policy, our bylaw 2.2, powers and duties of the board, is going to be amended or edited upon second reading to be policy BBA, which is school board powers and duties. This follows virtually line for line from our previous policy, and it does have the exact language that's required by Virginia Administrative Code 22.179 on what a school board must do. It's shall language, so it's requirements of the board. It sets forth the clear expectations. You will see that on lines 30, 31, 32, and the tail end of 33, we've crossed out a requirement that school divisions having 15,000 pupils or more in average daily membership have a plan for managing students. We've taken that out since we're so far from that number. It didn't make sense to include it in. Any questions about that or any other part of this policy? The last policy of ours, bylaw 2.8, is we had one policy that addressed school board member qualifications, oath of office, vacancies, and removal. That has been broken down by the Virginia School Board Association into 4 separate policies. The interesting part of the reason for doing this now is I didn't want to wait until we had a new school board elected but not yet sitting to change these policies. But in truth, the Virginia Code applies. So if our policy had said something different, which in these cases there's very, very little word changes, I didn't want there to be a question of does our policy govern or does the Virginia Code govern. So the school board policies follow closely the Virginia Code as far as what is required. For example, if you look at our policy 2.8, the first line of that is qualifications and what someone needs to qualify as a candidate for the school board. That now will be policy BBBA. If you look at BBBA, we did add, at one point they say that who a school board member represents and what his position is. We changed that to say his or her. And then we did add a line that had been included in our previous policy, making clear that state law prohibits the appointment to office of persons holding certain state and local offices, but that doesn't apply to anyone who's employed by the United States government. Because with so many people in our community who work for the federal government, we didn't want folks to think that there was any prohibition for them serving. So Amy and I had recommended adding that language, but if you don't want that included, we can take it out. Strong feelings on that?
Mr. Lawrence?
I mean, that just basically says what the Hatch Act already says, which is for nonpartisan offices, government employees are exempted from restrictions in running for office.
I think so. I tried to look in to see what state board members or state employees would not be able to serve on the school board, and I wasn't able to find that in the Virginia Code, so I thought since I was not clear on what it was, I thought it made sense to just say United States government employees may serve on the school board, which was the language from the previous policy.
Okay, yeah, I think it's the Hatch Act to try to keep, career civil servants out of partisan positions. But if it's a nonpartisan, if you're running not nominated by a party and, without a party symbol next to you, like we all do in city council, it doesn't apply. So, yeah, that's fine.
More about the Hatch Act than I, but yeah, that makes sense to me. Yes.
Thank you. Just because I noticed it now in line 6, there's a missing he, she. It just
Yes,
says he.
there is. I will add that. Thank you. I appreciate your eagle eye, and I apologize I didn't catch that. All right, any other questions or comments on BBBA? The next policy that would be moving from R 2.8 to a new policy is the oath of office. That is will be policy BBBC, board member oath of office. We did add language in there that came from our previous policy. It's in red, lines 8 and 9, clarifying that school board members who are filling unexpired terms still have to take the oath of office before they enter into the duties of office. I think that's a clarification that hopefully would never be necessary, but is good to have in there. Any questions about BBBC? The next line of 2.8, or the next section of our bylaw 2.8, will be the vacancies and unexpired term fulfillment. That will be now BBE, unexpired term fulfillment, and the wording is exactly the same as what was in ours, and there's just new updates to the code sections that it's citing. Questions about BBE? And the last one for this evening is policy BBD. It's taking the final section from our bylaw 2.8 titled removal, and the new BBD is called board member removal from office, and it cites to the code sections that apply in the event any school board member needs to be removed from office, or there's a motion to remove a school board member from office.
Any questions? Mr. Castillo?
On this one, is there any reason why you wouldn't want to just paste in pertinent sections of the code so people would know? I mean, this basically says, fire up the Google machine and find the statutory provisions. And for ease of use, wouldn't it be easier to let people know what that is?
We could do that if the board were so inclined. I printed out each of those sections because this was something I was not familiar with in my previous position and wanted to know what does that mean, because I anticipated questions along those lines. And it would turn it from a one-line policy saying any school board member may be removed following these sections into a probably 3 or 4 page summary of what the law is. My concern with doing that is that as we go to edit the policies in the future, as the law changes, we would need to make sure that every single word of this changes. If there's case law that then supersedes I guess it wouldn't supersede what's in the statute. I could do that if you'd like to. I think it just makes it a little bit more voluminous. And it is one that I hope will never need to be referred
Well,
to.
I guess, I mean, this kind of raises to me a question about the purpose of this exercise. Is if one of the things we do is make policy, it seems a lot of this exercise is basically we're just serving as a pointing device to pertinent statutory provisions. So, I mean, you could have a provision here saying any school board member may be removed from office in accordance with Virginia law. And that's about as useful as this is in this board member's opinion. And so, some of this goes to what are we doing here?
Right, right.
And I'm finding this process, while understandable on one level, is kind of opaque on another. And I know we're trying to track VSBA provisions, but as we continue down this path, I get less and less enthusiastic about it.
Well, I'm loving every minute of this policy revision, but
I'm sure you are.
I certainly
and
understand you.
You're not going to be working yourself out of a job, I'll tell you that.
Reitinger?
So I'm very sympathetic to Mr. Castillo's point. A lot of these policies really feel almost completely unnecessary, particularly where the policy is only a pointer to Virginia code. It doesn't add anything. All that said, I think that's probably the right answer in this case, because what it does is it provides a pointer to the place to look if it's in a matter of importance. So if somebody wants to see, if they get really angry with me and want to remove me as a school board member, then they don't have to, the Google machine can move much more quickly by looking at that. And I don't think we want to write all of the statutory language or a summary of it in the legislation. To my mind, it's a statutory drafting best practice not to cut and paste big sections of code, but just include cross-references because it makes the updating process easier. In this case, it's also, I think the policies probably need to be a little bit more verbose and stuff that you're going to use regularly. For things that are sort of arcane and don't matter to most people, I think pointers are probably just as fine. The last thing I say is, there are certain things I think we've all discovered about being a school board member that are not the most exciting. I think this kind of policy is among the least exciting, but I think there's a lot of policy that we do that's very different from this. For example, our triennial plan and the work plans and what the strategies and foci and goals of the school system are going to be. I think that's the place we probably want to put more energy than spending a lot of time into updating statutory references. So, all that leads me, while I think the actual process of converting to the VSBA standard policies is a bit turgid and maybe feels valueless, I think it is a valued exercise because it gets us out of the game of having to do this ever again and serves our future school board members well because they can just take the policy corpus and run with it, and then devote the time that they want to the matters that are of real importance. So I'm very sympathetic to what Mr. Castillo says. I just think it's something we need to grit our teeth and work our way through, as unpleasant as it may be.
And I largely agree with Mr. Reidinger, and I think, there may be middle grounds, like, I know things change, but we could have hyperlinks to some of these things. With respect to the turgid part of policy, part of my frustration stems from the fact that I know we have policies that are gravely in need of updating, and I look forward to working on those.
Those are the only policies for first reading. The policies for second read, those are the policies for first reading. Thank you.
Are there any follow-up questions before entertaining a motion?
So just
Mr. Reidinger?
Mr. Castillo just did raise a very valuable point. What he said before was valuable, but
Another valuable point, you mean?
The other valuable point is, if and when, when these things actually get published, making the statutory sections with hyperlinks to the published Virginia Code actually does make them a lot more useful and would be, I think, a best practice. So it's relatively easy to do. So I'd suggest that if that's possible, that when we publish the code, we put in hyperlinks.
Looks like we got a shaking of the head yes from over in the corner there, so. All right. So I'll entertain a motion for this, please.
I move that the school board approve first reading of the following policies: BB, school board legal status; BBA, school board powers and duties; BBAA, board member authority; BBBA, qualifications of school board members; BBBC, board member oath of office; BBD, board member removal from office; BBE, unexpired term fulfillment; IGBA, programs for students with disabilities; JGDA, disciplining students with disabilities; and JGDB, discipline of students with disabilities for infliction of serious bodily injury.
Your second? Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye opposed? Thank you. All right, we'll move on to items for second reading.
The first policy for second reading is policy CBA. That was the qualifications and duties for the superintendent. There were no changes to this from first reading last school board meeting.
Any questions? Mr. Castillo?
I'm sorry, I had target fixation on another policy. Which policy we're talking about again? I'm getting ahead to the one I do want to ask a question about.
CBA.
CBA.
Okay, never mind. I have no questions.
We'll move on to the next one, please.
CBA is appointment and term of the superintendent. CBB, sorry. CBB was discussed at length at the last school board meeting. There had been a line from our previous policy, 3.5, saying that appointment of the superintendent would have required an affirmative vote of a majority of the quorum. That was not language that was required in the Virginia Code currently, but I believe it was in there because of previous iteration of the Virginia Code had that requirement. There had been debate from the dais of whether that language should be in or not, and I know Mr. Lawrence had raised whether there needed to be a supermajority for this vote. So since there had not been agreement there, I took out the language that was brought over from 3.5, but did not know if that matter had been resolved or not, of how many board members need to be present in the meeting and how many of them need to vote in favor of the superintendent.
Questions or any?
All right, the next policy is CBD, the superintendent's contract, compensation, and benefits. This is former policy 3.5. There were no questions or changes to this from first reading. Are there any now? Policy CBG, evaluation of the superintendent, was former policy 3.7. And there were no changes or questions on this policy at first reading. Are there any at this point? The last three are tobacco-free school and staff for students. The first one is GBCE. That is the exact same language, the exact same policy as JFCH. It has the two letters, the two sets of letters, because one of them appears in the section on personnel, the other one appears in the section for students. Are there any questions about that policy.
Just one question, why one has vaporizers and the other does not? Because you had the discussion and you added it to GBECA. I didn't know if the JFCH serves a different purpose. It seems like they should track.
Adding electronic cigarettes, sorting right here. So GBECA, electronic cigarettes, we'd had the discussion of what are electronic cigarettes. I did add the language which includes vaporizers based on just a search of what it includes and whether there would be a debate of whether this includes vaping or not if vaping doesn't have a tobacco product. So added that language to GBECA. To be clear, Mr. Lawrence, are you asking whether we should add which includes vaporizers to the section on electronic cigarettes on line, let's see, 39 of the JFCH GBEC?
Right.
I think that would be reasonable to do. Is that acceptable to, okay?
Mr. Castillo?
And I would say in that vein, Ms. Gill brought up some very good questions about, what is vaping? What are some of these concepts? And, in JFCH defines smoking, it defines tobacco. It doesn't have a definition of vaporizer or electronic cigarettes. And I think I would feel better if we at least tried to tackle what that looked like, because I think, vaporizing somewhat begs the question, especially when some of these things are non-tobacco nicotine delivery devices.
So in policy JFCH or GBEC, which are the same on lines 38, 39, and 40, and 41, 42 of the second page, it does prohibit electronic cigarettes. The difference between that and tobacco products are students are prohibited from possessing any electronic cigarettes, whereas other persons can't use it but can possess it on school property.
Right, but we still don't know what those are. I mean, so I would feel better if we had a definition of electronic cigarettes, which would include vaporizers.
So Mr. Lawrence proposed adding after students are prohibited from possessing electronic cigarettes, adding the same addition that we did to policy GBECA that adds a parenthetical electronic cigarettes, parentheses, which includes vaporizers. Would that meet your need, or do you want a better?
Yeah, it expands the universe. It doesn't, I don't know if that's really a definition that you were looking for, though.
Ms. Gill?
Well, one question above that. Do we have just a general definition section in our policies?
No.
No. So if we define it here, then I would say that when we refer to other places, we should say electronic cigarettes as defined in policy, blah, 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 just so people can refer back to it. If we did define it here, and I agree with Mr. Castillo, providing a more robust definition of it may help us in the long term, because I don't really know. I'm a little, as I said in our last meeting, I was not really sure if vaping was also an e-cigarette. And just clarifying that a tobacco-less product also would fall under this, this restriction.
Yep.
So I'm listening to the conversation. I'm wondering, in the section that has 1, 2, and 3 and ends at line 29, could we add a number 4 that just says electronic cigarettes and vaping or vaporizing, and then give a definition somewhere between line 29 and 30 from the USDA has a website that begins to define it, or Food and Drug, FDA. Is that what
The FDA has what they call electronic nicotine delivery systems, ENDS, they call them. And those include vaporizers, vape pens, hookah pens, electronic cigarettes, and e-pipes. So it just goes on and on.
Okay.
So that might be a good place to start.
Okay.
Brian, go.
So a quick search of the Virginia Code reflects that in, hold on, 18.2-371.2, there is a definition of a number of things, including nicotine vapor product an alternative nicotine product. I wonder, since that's in the Virginia Code, if someone could take a look at that, figure if it's right, and if so, just include a cross-reference that electronic cigarettes means and includes nicotine vapor products as defined in whatever subsection H. I take the point that it would be good to have a good definition, and since that seems to be the Virginia definition, if a little bit of research indicates that, that feels like the least burdensome way to do it.
I would agree with that, that having some type of definition kind of so that we can, makes it easier in laying out what's there for those things.
Sure, I can do that and then bring these policies, add that, send it to you all for second reading at the next school board meeting. So that means policies GBEC, JFCH.
Ms. Benson, so I was going to say, could we, with the, as opposed to pulling it off, can we move forward with that this evening, or do you prefer to go
Mr. Chairman,
add the language in there?
I don't think we should be amending policy by Google at the dais. I mean, this is something that can wait till our next meeting to get it right.
Okay, that's fine.
So all of the policies that relate to cigarettes, KGC, JFCH, GBEC, and GBECA, I'll go back, add the definition, and refer to. I think that's a very reasonable reference to the Virginia Code in the criminal code where they do define those. Have that for second reading at our next school board meeting. Were there any other comments to these smoking and tobacco policies that I can answer in advance of that second reading? Any other concerns that were on people's minds related to these policies?
Seeing none, we in a motion on the second readings minus the several with regard to the cigarette and smoking policy.
Chairman, so I've got a motion on one. I move that the school board approve second reading and adoption of policy CBB, appointment and term of the superintendent, with the following change. On line 5, and this tracks with her original language that we add, appointment of the superintendent will require the affirmative vote of no fewer than 4 members of the school board at an open board meeting for which proper notice was given of the intended action. And this just tracks with what I said last month, that I think we should require that a superintendent cannot be hired without less than a majority of the board voting for them. I just think that would be a very bad signal for any superintendent.
I agree with that statement, Mr. Lawrence.
Sorry, is that a second?
Any discussion of that? Mr.
I agree in substance, but I think that the policy needs to allow a majority to improve a superintendent, because you have to be able to appoint a superintendent even if it's just a bare majority of the board. So I would say that we would never want to do that, but the policy ought to be consistent and limited to what the code requires, and not require a supermajority where a supermajority conceivably might not be available and therefore a superintendent not able to be.
No, this is not a supermajority. It's no fewer than 4, so it's a simple majority. I understand about the supermajority. I would love it if we required it, but we're obviously not going to. So what I'm saying is it needs to be a majority of the full board.
So, Mr. Lawrence, could you reread the amendment so I could take a look at it again?
Basically, and I'm just adding in language from what Trish took out from her initial one last month, just saying appointment of the superintendent will require the affirmative vote of no fewer than 4 members of the school board at an open meeting, proper notice, etc. So all it's saying is a superintendent should not be hired without a majority of the board voting in favor. Dr. Noonan, I don't know if you want to weigh in and say, how would you feel if you had been voted as a new superintendent and you had the vote of less than a majority of the school board? I mean, what sort of signal is that?
Well, with all due respect, I'm not sure I would come.
That's exactly my point.
Even if it wasn't, so I think this policy is really up to you. I think the rub here in my mind is if you get into a position where it comes down to having the state take over or not. And I think that there are, I think this policy is in place to ensure that the superintendency is filled, but I really think it's really the will of the board.
Yeah, no, I mean, the point about the state is a good one, but my attitude is if a future school board here in 180 days, in almost an entire school year, in half a calendar year, cannot get a majority in favor of a superintendent candidate, then honestly, the state should step in, because the people up here are not doing their job if they cannot get 4 votes for one of our 3 purposes: hiring a superintendent, doing policy, doing the budget. So if that would also be an incentive for a board that is so dysfunctional that they cannot get 4 people together to have that 180 days holding over their heads saying, we'd better do it or the state will step in, then good. I mean, that is why the state will step in. I don't see that ever happening. I frankly hope that we never get a superintendent who comes in here with less than a unanimous vote. But I also feel we should never have a superintendent come in here crippled at the outset by not having a majority of the board behind him or her. I mean, I do think, A, that would be a horrible sign, because A, at that point, whoever the superintendent is has already told their old position, this is where I am, sitting in the audience in public, and then suddenly they find out they don't even have a majority of the board supporting them. I think that would be one of the worst possible scenarios we could have. So if people are comfortable with less than a majority of the board hiring a superintendent, then simply vote against this. But I feel very strongly we have to require a majority.
I'd like to request
Mr. Reitinger.
Mr. Lawrence again, or the clerk reread the amendment so I could hear it again. Thank you.
All right, and Trish, tell me if I say isn't doing what I intend. I'll read the first 2 sentences. The first sentence is, the school board appoints the superintendent from the list of eligibles certified by the Board of Education and determines the term of employment. What I would add is, appointment of the superintendent will require the affirmative vote of no fewer than 4 members of the school board at an open board meeting for which proper notice was given of the intended action. And 90% of that language is from Trish's initial draft last month. So all this says is you can't hire a superintendent unless you can get 4 out of our 7 members to vote in favor.
I'd ask a question. Is there a particular reason it says 4 members as opposed to a majority? Because if we had, say there were 2 vacancies that had not been refilled, that would require 4 out of 5 members, correct?
It would, and I thought about that. Again, if that makes the board fill those vacancies more quickly, then that's making the board do its job. I mean, the board, if we've got 5 members and we're missing a superintendent, the board needs to get moving and do what it should. So again, if we came down to 5 and then you had 3 and then you appointed 2, you got 2 who weren't even on when you were hired, you've got less than a majority of the board who voted in favor, I still think that is a horrible signal. So I did look at that. And again, we can spin a whole bunch of scenarios and what ifs, but it's like saying I could imagine a storm that would tear the roof off Mount Daniel. Well, does that mean we shouldn't put a roof on Mount Daniel? No, we should put a really good roof on Mount Daniel and make sure that it doesn't come off. And I think the same thing here. We should require a majority of the board.
I have to comment. I can't think of any more important decision a school board makes than that of hiring a superintendent. And I fully agree with you, Mr. Lawrence. I believe we need to have a majority to appoint the school board, but I do want to consider what Mr. Reidinger said too. If we don't have a full board sitting, where does that leave us? If we name a number that is currently the majority of school board members, but if two were missing from the board, where does that, that could pose a problem. I'd just like to discuss that a little more and kick that idea around before we vote.
Other comments? Mr. Castillo.
I think Dr. Noonan's remark that he wouldn't take a job with an offer from 3 board members is a useful data point that I think, I agree with Mr. Lawrence that I would hope that there would be unanimity among all the board members that were sitting, but I think we can't future-proof things like this, and I think the superintendent has to accept the job offer, and I don't think he or she would do that without having some context about how there was a three-person vote. And frankly, as we spin this out, what if you had a quorum? They could, the school board of the members then present could vote to suspend the policy. So this just goes on and on and on. And so I think we can't try to address every single possible scenario, and I think that it's best left as is.
Mr. Reidinger.
I really don't have anything to add to what Mr. Castillo said. I agree with him.
And I actually agree as well. I do agree that I think with any superintendent that we would hire, before they would, or we would make the offer, I think generally we would have a sense of majority, at least a majority of the board being in favor of that person before even extending an offer. Because as Mr. Lawrence says, I wouldn't want to have that situation either, that without knowing at least a majority of the board is in favor of a superintendent before going public with an offer and voting on that without having some sense of where board members are with regard to voting on that person, because I don't think any of us would want that scenario. And as Dr. Noonan said, if it came down to 3 members, I wouldn't want that job either, because you are starting kind of already behind the 8 ball with having the support of the people who are hiring, with the majority of the people who are hiring you. So there are a ton of scenarios out there, but I think kind of sticking with what we have, I think, is the best route forward. But we'll forward if there's a second for Mr. Lawrence, we'll on that.
I'd like to add, though, to that, Mr. Webb, we can look at this policy in the context of the current school board, and we know we would never let something like this happen, but we need to think about the future and what future members might do and who they are. So we can't foresee that, can we? I really prefer to hedge our bets and put something in about majority voting for this new superintendent. I just feel comfortable with that language. I don't feel comfortable with the language that's here right now. I think we're not I don't think we're looking forward enough to possible scenarios.
Would you rather have it be a majority of the board as opposed to no fewer than 4?
I think I'd lean towards the majority, just given what Mr. Reidinger said before. If there are some unfulfilled seats on the board, I'd hate for a number to hold up a vote like that. So I prefer majority.
Okay, well then, sorry, Phil, you have it. Okay, then I would amend my motion to say that it should say appointment of the superintendent will require an affirmative vote of a majority of the school board at an open board meeting for which proper notice was given of the intended action. That way it's a majority, whether it's 7, whether it's 6, or whether it's 5. And if we get below 5, then I think all bets are off and we're not hiring a superintendent until we get more people.
I'm thinking about the parliamentary nature of this, because I think technically, and I don't mean to be pointy-headed idiot about this. There needs to be a motion to amend the motion that needs to be voted since the motion was made and seconded. However, perhaps we could seek unanimous consent for Mr. Draw his first motion and make a renewed motion. That way we wouldn't have any need to go through any issues.
Ms. Lawrence, would you agree
Okay,
to?
I withdraw the first, and I move that the school board adopt policy CBB, appointment and term of the superintendent, with the following change. On line 5, after the word employment, add appointment of the superintendent will require the affirmative vote of a majority of the school board at an open board meeting for which proper notice was given of the intended action.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those, any further discussion about the motion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No.
No?
We have a roll call vote, please.
Yep. Ms. Goodell?
No.
No. And I will entertain a motion for those items on second reading, with the exception of those related to the electronic cigarettes.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the school board approve second reading and adoption of policy CBA, qualifications and duties of the superintendent, policy CBB, appointment and term of the superintendent, policy CBD, superintendent's contract, compensation, and benefits, and policy CBG, evaluation of the superintendent.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All ayes have abstentions? Motion carries. Are there any board members with future agenda items? We'll move on to the report of the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few updates this evening that I'd like to share with you. The first is want to thank our team locally for moving forward with progress at Mount Daniel. We have now, almost all of the new trailers have been rough set at this point. We're waiting on 2 others to come in to be rough set on the lower portion. And we are still on target for an August 19th move-in date. I want to thank Sevi Padilla and his cleaning crews for coming into Mount Daniel and doing an outstanding job. I stopped there on my way here this evening, and there were a couple of crews coming up to move some things in, and they're just really bending over backwards to get Mount Daniel clean and ready for our staff to move in. Also want to thank Dang Nguyen for making sure that all of our Cox cable and communications and all of the electronic devices and the like are going to be working up there as well, and just everyone involved in getting it going. So if you have a chance to go by Mount Daniel, you will see quite a bit of progress, and it looks like we're set for the August 19th target date. Just an update on the triennial plan. As I mentioned in the Friday update, at the next work session, we will be bringing you a draft triennial plan. This has taken quite good shape, I think, over the last several weeks with staff. We have some refinement to do between now and when we see you to go through it. But I did want to announce that my hope is between the time that you all have a chance to see it at a work session and we have a chance to adopt it as you have a chance to adopt it as a board, my intention is to try to get out in the community and share it on a couple of different occasions. The method of sharing this time is going to be through social media, and I'm trying to find a couple of coffee shops to sit in and set up shop in the corner and share the triennial plan with some folks and also get it out to some others electronically. We are continuing to get staffed up for the first of school. Interviewed a couple of teachers today and are very excited about those folks that are coming in to work for us this year. We still are in need of 2 part-time food service employees, so if anybody knows somebody who's looking for a position part-time, We would love to interview you, and also some two bus attendants. So if there's anybody out there that's interested in bus attendant job, we would welcome you in that conversation as well. Otherwise, we're looking very good for our start with our staffing currently. Just want to announce to our youngest new students here to the City of Falls Church, our kindergartners, there is a play date on September 1st from 2 to 4 at Cherry Hill Park. Should be a lot of fun and a good opportunity to get to know each other. We are as I mentioned last week, we are in the process of reviewing the Kiss and Ride or the student drop-off at Mary Ellen Henderson and George Mason High School, and potentially making some modifications there. We are doing some practice runs to see what the impact is, whether it's doable or not, but this will be a bit of a culture shift to the community where the pickup and drop-off is, but certainly will give enough information to the community ahead of any changes that will be made so that everyone will be aware. And the last is just look forward to working with all of you, or as many of you that are going to be there on Friday at our retreat. I think it'll be a nice opportunity to get away from the work for a day and spend some time getting to know how we can work together now and into the future. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll end my remarks.
Comments for the superintendent? Okay. Mr. Reitinger.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noonan. Not a comment, but a question. Can you tell us where kindergarten enrollment stands right now for?
Had a conversation just last week with Ms. Kelly, and we are tracking to about right where we were this time last year. So we're on target. I can give you a number tomorrow.
Mr. Lawrence?
And actually, what Phil asked just reminded me, we had a parent who had asked for early admission for a kindergartner for this coming year. Whatever happened with that? We had 2 requests, but one was for next year. And before Dr. Schiller left, he had found a place that could do the assessment.
Right. We were planning to bring that to the work session in 2 weeks to share with the team where we are.
Okay, would that be enough time? But does that by definition mean that the student cannot be admitted because we would not be able to pass a policy before school started?
Let me back up a minute. We had a chance to talk about this with the chair and the vice chair, and where we landed is that we are going to, for this current year, we're going to continue to follow our current policy. There's a number of reasons that we discussed. One was the timing of it. The other was the birth date of the students and looking at the numbers of kids that would be impacted if we were to change it. So we were going to send a notice to the parent this year that we weren't going to change the policy and that you had to be 5 to enter kindergarten by the date certain, and that we would review the policy going forward from here to look at any potential shifts that we need to make. So we will be reaching out to that parent to let them know that we will maintain the current policy, but we'll be reviewing it in the coming year.
I just want to say, if I might, thank you. I don't think this was the chair and I trying to make a decision for the whole board. The clear consensus of the board, the last time we talked about this, was that we were not going to grant ad hoc admission. So if we wanted to allow someone in early admission, we wanted it to be in accord with a policy that could be broadly applied. And absent that, we weren't going to admit a person. We don't have that policy yet, and until we can get one, I think the prior, at least my recollection of the prior consensus of the board was we didn't want to be doing ad hoc one-offs, you can come in with this birthday, you cannot come in. And there just hasn't, I think, been time to present the issue to the board yet for a decision about the policy, which is why it's on the next work session meeting. But that's, I think, where we are right now.
Okay, you will call the parent who wrote us, right? Because honestly, I mean, Dr. Schiller brought us, the local assessment group back in, what, April? I mean, it was before he left. So the fact that we're now in effect mid-August and we've decided not to do something and we still haven't told the parent, and this parent and the other parent were, never told when it was on our agenda either. I mean, I think to a certain extent we've sort of failed in keeping them notified. And honestly, it does feel like the chair and the vice chair made a decision on our behalf. I understand why, but I think this is something that, we need to admit that we sort of failed and it dropped through the cracks for a variety of reasons, new superintendents and everything else. But I do think, and I don't know the parent, but I do think you should, reach out and give a call, because I think we slipped up several times here.
With regard, there wasn't a decision. We definitely had a conversation as a board, and the consensus was we wouldn't each situation make the decision on that. It would be looking at and creating a policy. Yes, did we move quickly enough in this particular case? I would probably say not, but it is something that we're going to have a discussion on at the upcoming work session. And Dr. Schiller with the family, I know there was at least one point where there was, with the staff, there was a dropping of the ball of communicating with them that we were going to be doing that. But I know at the next time, because I made the call to Dr. Schiller to make sure that he made the contact with the family, that we were going to either have it on the agenda or not have it on the agenda. But it's not something that Mr. Rattinger nor I are making it our two of us making a decision, but it's something that the board had a conversation about, and it was a consensus that we wouldn't ad hoc. This student comes this year, their birthday's in November, we're going to say no to them, but this student comes the next year and their birthday is October and we're going to say yes. I think we need a more broad policy versus the end of 101, because I think there's, looking at some of our surrounding jurisdictions of what they do within those policies, I think needs to be looked at as well, versus each individual case by case would take, I think, more time away from what we need to do versus having a robust conversation and making a policy about how we address these situations.
I also, to be clear, this is not a case where we don't have a policy. We don't have a policy, but we don't have a policy that allows this. And without a policy that allows it, it requires some sort of, in fact, we've got a policy that requires that the age requirements be met, and a waiver has to be granted. We don't have a means for granting a waiver. A waiver has not yet been instituted according to policy yet. Neither Arlington nor Fairfax allow these sorts of waivers. It is correct that we were not able to get to the decision about whether to institute a full waiver process at this point in time, but that's the reason why we've got one coming up at the work session. I think it is, at the minimum, an overstatement to say there's a failure in that regard, primarily because there are a lot of things going on, both with the Mount Daniel issues, with all of the other things like the budget that were going on, and with the work on the George Mason MEH campus. So to be sure, would it have been better to have this on a work session in June? Would it have been possible with Dr. Noonan just coming on board and all the other things we were asking staff to do? I think the answer is probably no. And so I do take strong exception to the notion that the chair and I made a decision. What I said specifically was that we didn't have a policy that allowed this. The board clearly wanted a policy in order before granting this, and that it felt to me like we could go forward with the next available work session to get this done, recognizing that that won't likely be in time for one parent. And that does trouble me, but I don't think we could have done anything differently. And if Mr. Lawrence is interested in fixing the policy right now, he could make a motion from the dais to amend the policy. But I don't think we've got the data in front of us, nor have we had the discussion to do that. And so I would think that would be an inadvisable course. All the chair and I did was simply say, we understand this is what the policy is, and we haven't talked about this yet as a board. I'm happy to answer any more questions about that if there's any doubt that Lawrence and I did not make a decision on behalf of the board.
I'm sorry I made you so defensive, Phil. My only point is, we were asked this months ago for someone who wanted to start school this year, and frankly, she has gotten radio silence from us. If we had said in June, listen, we have got Mount Daniel, we have got GM, we have got all these other things, we are not going to get to it, I'm sure she would have been understanding. My real criticism is, in effect, we're now saying we're not going to get to it and it's mid-August. And I think that is a failure. You can disagree with me, but I mean, this is a woman who repeatedly was not told that it was even on our agenda back when Dr. Schiller was here. The other woman did, simply because she's my neighbor across the street, and I would say, hey, do you know this is on? And she didn't know either. So my point is, we failed to communicate that we were not going to get it done for very good reasons, and that is what I think the failure is. So that's why I'm saying I think she deserves a call. That's all.
Just to make sure that we close the loop on the communication, we had intended to reach out to the parents, so that'll happen.
I have an unrelated question. Mount Daniel, when will, as an incoming kindergarten parent, and I think other people have asked me this, when will demolition happen? Will that be happening while kids are in school?
It appears, it's a great question, it appears that it is more likely than not that demolition will be happening while school is in session. What I understand is, though, as part of the process, there'll be a barrier wall that's placed inside first, and then that section will come down. The way it's been suggested to me is that there's going to be construction, whether they're putting up new construction or demolishing the building while kids are there, and that they will take the appropriate precautions to make sure that our students are safe, and they will also likely be working on some weekends to take care of some of that as well. The big, in the demolition process, the demolition itself won't take very long. It's really more of the cleanup post-demolition that's going to take some time, and the heavy equipment will be in there, but we'll be monitoring for student safety the whole way through, and sound, and disruption, and dust, and noise, and all of those kinds of things.
Any other questions for the superintendent before we move on? Mr. Lawrence?
Actually, just one on Mount Daniel. So given that it's going to be demolished during the school year, does that mean the police will not be able to run their drills?
We're still working with the police. It appears that they will be able to run their drills. Just may not be during the week when students are there.
Oh, God, no.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, we're still going to be working with the police.
We'll move on to board and student liaison comments. And we'll start with Mr. Lawrence and work our way down.
September 8th, the athletic boosters are having a family night. Everybody should get out for that. It's a nice place to meet a lot of parents if you're running for office, but also a great way to support the schools and really foster school spirit from elementary all the way up through high school.
What's the date for that again?
September 8th. It's a Friday.
Mr. Castillo?
Nothing.
Mr. Reininger?
Nothing to add tonight.
Word?
Yeah, I just want to report about the Daycare Advisory Board. There is one position they're trying to fill. So we're looking for volunteers for that. And I just wanted to report a little bit on the summer daycare camp. There's an new activity this year. The children are cooking, and it is, they are actually judging the kids' cooking. And I think Dr. Noonan, among others, were the judges this summer. And if you want to tell us a little bit about that, we'd love to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a chance to be the guest judge. I left before the actual judging started, so I have to be honest about that. But I had a chance to really enjoy a number of different dishes, from shrimp po' boy to a grilled brie and ham sandwich to, I mean, it was fantastic. It was as though I was in a restaurant. So really great opportunity to see our summer program and those chefs in action.
Welcome, Mr. Nkuma, and I'll jump right at you, see if you have any comments for report and liaison comments.
Oh, no, it's been a very quiet summer. Thank you.
Any comments that you have on for anything?
I have not met with the SEA yet to discuss with them what we've been discussing this summer. Also, so what I do before every meeting is I send out a Snapchat of my story and I say, is there anything you would like for me to bring up to the school board? And 100% of the answers I've gotten is the roofs and how they're falling down. So I just want to put that out there, and it's been a fun time working with you so far.
With the roof, with the solution that we have, I think we hopefully have taken care of as best we can of that it won't be raining on you on the inside this school year. So just hold us to that as those things happen, to make sure you and your fellow students let us know those things so we can make sure that we take care of that in the proper way. I do not have any comments. As Mr. Nkuma said, it's been fairly quiet summer. Yes.
I just wanted to say to the board and to the community tomorrow, the Ed Foundation also is having a fundraiser at the locker room, and 15% of the proceeds from sales tomorrow go to the school system, or to the Ed Foundation. So if you're hungry, go to the locker room.
What time is it, in the evening?
It's all day.
And Mr. Chairman, just
Yes,
reminding
Ms.
me of one
Lawrence.
thing. Everybody, September 17th, Sunday, Run for the Schools. It'll be on us sooner rather than later, so please sign up. It's always a huge event, and I think it's going to sneak up on us because it's already August. So Sunday, September 17th.
Thank you. And we have one set of minutes for approval for July 26. And I'll ask unanimous consent to approve those minutes. There's there for board review, and I'll ask for adjournment. Thank you very much.